Hello again, and in this screencast we are going to be talking about Chapter 7, Section 1 in the textbook, which deals with pages 224 to pages 231. Changes over time. Now in this chapter we're going to be talking about Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. So, who was Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin was a 22-year-old man when he sailed aboard the ship called the HMS Beagle. You can see a representation of it right here. What he did was sailed around the world and became the naturalist for this ship. Now a naturalist is a person who studies plants and animals. And as you can imagine, as he sailed around the world on this ship, it took quite a long time. He started off in what's called Great Britain or England. And then as he followed his path all the way to Australia, and then eventually back to South America, and then finally back to England, it took 5 years. Charles Darwin was 22 at the time when he started this ship, or started this trip. Okay? And his most famous discoveries happened on the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are located across the Pacific Ocean, across from Ecuador, what is now Ecuador. And if we zoom in on the Galapagos Islands, we see them right here. There are a couple of volcanic islands that make up the Galapagos Islands. As you see, these Galapagos Islands vary in size as well as shape. Not only do they vary in size and shape, but they also vary or differ in vegetation. They're slightly different elevations, which means they're a slightly different environment on each and every one of these islands. What Charles Darwin noticed was that on each one of these islands, there was a slightly different finch, which is a type of bird. We'll study that more later on in class. And this finch had a slightly different beak depending on what island it was from. If it was on a certain island, it would have a large beak, very thick, very large for cracking seeds and nuts. If it was on this island, let's say, it might have had a very small beak to pick out insects out of cracks and crevices. So depending on the island, the bird's beak changed depending on the food source or the environment. That struck Charles Darwin as a little weird, and he started asking questions based on those observations. Other animals that he discovered on these islands were tortoises, and he noticed the tortoises' shells were slightly different as well. So these observations led Charles Darwin to believe in evolution through natural selection. So what is evolution through natural selection? It's basically this. Charles Darwin noticed that there's an overproduction of animals. Every animal out there, as well as plants, overproduces, which means they have too many offspring, too many babies. Not every single one of those babies can survive. If you can imagine, if every single one of these grasshoppers happened to survive to adulthood and they found a mate and they also produced offspring, imagine how many of these grasshoppers would roam the earth. There would just be too many of them. Which brings us to Charles Darwin's next thing. Variation. Now, even though you might not see it, there's a slight variation between these animals. Not every single one of these grasshoppers is the exact same. Some of these grasshoppers might jump a little higher. Some of these grasshoppers might see a little better. Some of these grasshoppers might be a little slower, might not like a certain food. So there's a slight variation between every single animal out there, as well as plants. These are Charles Darwin's two observations. There's an overproduction and there's a variation within an animal species. Not everyone is the exact same. So What he concluded was there must be a competition to survive. Since there's too many animals and they're slightly different, some of them are probably going to die. That leads to competition. And this competition could be many things. It's a competition to find the amount of food, the correct amount of food. It's a competition to run away from predators. It's a competition to find the best soil if you're a plant. It's a competition to find the best nesting site if you're a bird. So there's competition out there in order for an animal to survive. Those animals that are able to compete well, that is to say, those animals that are able to run away from predators or hide from predators, or those animals that are able to find a mate, or those animals that are able to reproduce, those animals that are able to survive usually have good traits or good aspects about them. They might be able to swim fast, see good. They might be able to hear well. They might have good camouflage. Whatever it is they have is probably pretty good because it enables them to survive. Now, the final thing Charles Darwin came up with is probably the most important, which is this: reproduction. If you're an animal, let's say a rabbit, and you're able to survive, that means no foxes or wolves ate you. If you're able to survive, that means you are now able to pass on your traits to your offspring or your kids. Offspring is kids. So if you're a boy rabbit and survived, and you're a girl rabbit and survived, that means you probably have good eyesight. It probably means you're able to hear the foxes. It probably means you have good camouflage and you're able to hop pretty darn fast. When you get together with your partner, you have the male, and you get together with your female who also survived, you're going to have a kid. And this kid, just like you guys, you look a little bit like your mom and a little bit like your dad. Same thing in rabbits, as well as dogs. If we have a boy dog right here, and we have a girl dog right here, we have a beagle and a pug, if they get together, their offspring is going to look a little bit like the dad and a little bit like the mom. And we do have that example. This is called a puggle. Okay, and again, you see the traits of the dad, the floppy ears. If you look closely, you guys can see the tail. So we picked up some of the traits from the dad, and we picked up some of the traits from the mom. The punched-in nose, the fur color came from the mom. So let's recap here. Charles Darwin, natural selection through overproduction. There's a variation. There is competition. There is selection. Some animals survive, some don't, based on their traits. And then finally, there's survival and reproduction. And the kids will look like the offspring. This is what Charles Darwin discovered in his voyage across the world in the HMS Beagle. Thank you.